Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to bring you our latest update as there's been more class changes coming in on December 5th. As promised, they had a number of healer changes incoming, and some of them are kind of interesting. After all the talk about Resto Druid doing crazy damage, Ferocious Bite's been nerfed by 20%, Rip damage by 15%, Rake and Shred both by 10%. So a pretty hefty drawdown to a lot of Resto Druid's damage. Obviously, it was really hyped up of like doing all this damage while in cat form. And yay, huzzah, you can do all this damage, but also being able to have the uptime to do the damage pretty much shifts you into cat form and you're doing no healing and you're just relying on your hots, of course. I'm still very surprised that they weren't doing anything to make like Vigil better to increase its like passive healing or passive damage, I should say. And we'll talk a little bit more as we see some of the other changes. But yeah, I mean, it's great for specs like Holy Priest or even Resto Druid to do lots of damage if it takes a lot of activity time to do it. I don't think this is going to be the end of the world. I think Resto Druid was doing crazy damage in like low to mid 20s and everything, and it probably still will, even despite the nerfs coming into it. But it definitely is weird, especially when you think about it from a raiding environment where you're not trying to spend any uptime at all in cat form, and so there's this big divide going forward of like the passive damage that healers are doing in raids and then the active damage that they can start doing in M+. It's kind of just highlighting that unfortunate change. Mana Tea, in addition to the mana regen you get, now reduces the mana cost of spells by 25% instead of 50% after you're drinking. Upwelling is not able to stack as high. That's the buff to Essence Font. And Essence Font's healing has been decreased by 10%. Invigorating Mist, which is the Vivify Cleave healing. So if you Vivify A, but person B has Renewing Mist on them, the Invigorating Mist is cleaving onto person B. That got nerfed, while Vivify's primary healing target got increased by 5%. Calming Coalescence now increases the absorbed amount of Like Cocoon by 2% a stack instead of 3. This is kind of no surprise. Cocoon is just nuts in raids in particular. So I'm not too terribly surprised to see something coming in to try to reduce the Life Cocoon value. Ancient Concordance now increased the chance for Blackout Kick to reset Rising Sun Kick by 12%. And this was also kind of like the tail end of a number of changes for Monk at like the very end of 10.2 PTR, where they were trying to like buff a number of like fist weaving, kick weaving type stuff. But you were still playing like Clouded Focus type setup, even though there was a lot of those Ancient Teachings, the Monastery type of buffs, and like kick weaving kind of buffs coming in. So like, yay, cool. I don't really think it's going to change a lot from like a rating perspective whatsoever. But I still am kind of excited to play Monk. If these changes are going to be like the brunt of the dangers, you might say, that Mistweaver's going to be facing, I'm still excited to play it. I pretty much just got home from Race to World First, and I'm still getting work done on my main and catching up on my main. But then afterwards, definitely Monk and Preservation Evoker have been kind of catching my eye. Even more so because they're not doing a whole lot with Holy Paladin. Yay, Crusader Strike isn't going to you anymore. Huzzah, deals more damage. Hammer of Wrath, same thing. Doesn't cost so much mana, does more damage. Yay. But there's still so much of this kit I feel like is just not really giving you much benefit, and a huge part of it is your holy power. And so yay, I can cast Crusader Strike and Hammer of Wrath without fear of ooming or something, right? But I'm getting this holy power to spend on what exactly? It doesn't feel satisfying dumping your holy power, and it feels often very expensive to be spending your holy power unless you have like higher stacks of some of your passive buffs to the abilities, and there's no real way to like further increase your mana. So yeah, Holy Paladin's been feeling really unfun for me when I've been doing my split runs of my team, and I'm really disappointed by there not being larger changes to start fixing up Holy Paladin's mana, especially because the spec doesn't have a mana dump. Like, they just don't. It's not like they could spend all this mana on something that increases their output the way Monk does, you know? It's weird. Discipline, healing and damage has both been reduced by 3%. And of course, getting your damage nerfed is also going to be also including your healing. So these are, not surprising to be able to see some nerfs that are coming in. This is about what I expected coming in for disc nerfs, especially in the position where disc was just railing everybody else in a raiding environment. The weird thing is that you're like not bad in dungeon damage, but you're certainly not the highest in like dungeon damage for healers. Having a 3% nerf for it, kind of unfortunate. What can you do? But again, this is more in line with my expectations for the spec thus far. So it's honestly, we're doing great, so I can't complain too much. Holy Priest, however, has been struggling quite a lot. They're one of the lower output or lowest output healers in raid at the moment. A 4% healing buff, I don't think is going to be changing everything on its own, but it's nice to be able to see. I think having Symbol of Hope getting nerfed as heavily as it did definitely has a large impact on like Holy's performance and its like representation, but so does, Disc doing better, right? Burning Vehemence now causes your Holy Fire to deal 75% of its initial damage to nearby enemies. This I'm actually kind of surprised by because Holy Priest cranks damage in dungeons in particular. It does have that same sort of problem of like the active versus passive damage scenario, like we talked about earlier with Resto Druid. But yeah, I mean, Holy Priest already does really good damage. So, I mean, hey, maybe I'll just flex into it some more and some keys that I know I'm going to be able to stomp. That being said, the spec definitely struggles when you need to have lots of burst output on the entire party. Things like the third boss of Everbloom, where you need to just blast tons of output into everybody all at once, and you have to move around. That's definitely an area where the spec can struggle. The Mirrored Steel 2-piece now has Renews caused by Serenity lasting 18 seconds, and then Renews caused by Sanctify now lasting 6 seconds. This is pretty cool. You're getting a decent amount of Renew. You're actually getting quite a bit of Renew healing out from your 2-set bonus. That being said, that in the 4-piece, I don't think Holy Priest is going to be like overtaking any specs really in like a raiding environment. I think that they're going to move a little bit closer. But again, the utility is also a major factor, and the strength of disc is also a major factor in its performance and its representation in like a raid. And then in an M+ environment, yeah, it doesn't matter too much if Holy can do more damage than disc. If disc has a better chance of surviving with double pain sup, barrier, rapture shields, all of that other fun stuff. Holy still has a survivability issue that really needs to get looked at in dungeons. And while obviously you can do it, it's just more work to be able to survive relative to other specs that you have options to be able to work with. So that's really where I think that Holy could be using more attention, is like its utility in a raid and its survivability in M+, and even in raids as well. And guess what does both? Symbol of Hope. So probably would have been nice if there was something in there to bring up Symbol of Hope's value, but also possibly discourage it being stacked by, 1, disc being very strong, and then 2, making some changes to prevent Symbol from just being like the perma-stack use that we saw over the past couple raid tiers. Not sure. Maybe we have to wait for 10.2.5 for that. Resto Druid. Healing Surge now costs 4.4% of base mana. Was 4.8. Cool. My experience in dungeons was if I was casting too much Surge in PTR, I would just insta-oom. I'm not sure how much is going to change there. Chain Lightning damage is increased by 20%, and Acid Rain damage has been increased by 10%. I feel like a lot of these are sort of placebo because, once again, yeah, it's great if healers are able to deal damage, but the way that this season is really heading is for survivability, like making your way out of one-shots, shutting down mobs, having all the kicks, stops, interrupts, whatever, to be able to get through the dungeon. And so, yeah, it's great if your healer can add some more damage to the equation, but survivability and party crowd control make a much bigger difference than anything else. And so I think on the vein of like Resto Shaman and Holy Priest damage buffs and Resto Druid damage nerfs, those things aren't really what's going to determine the meta. And in 10.1.5, Holy Pally, of course, dominated and was doing the most damage, but it really slid down in its damage to the end of 10.1.7, where Disc Priest was easily crushing it in overall damage. But Paladin was still the best because it was better at surviving. It was better at increasing the survivability of others around. The kick that you have on hand, the utility that gets brought to the table, all exceeded, I should say, the benefits that like the disc would give him in that season. And I think the same thing is going to hold true in this season as well, especially when you have a lot more poisons to deal with. And, disc is not really great for dealing with those either. So that's my thoughts so far with these changes. I think they could go a little bit further, and I hope that when 10.2.5 has more patch notes coming around, that we do start seeing a couple more adjustments to try to even things out, especially with like Faded on the horizon, the War Within on the horizon. This is really the opportunity for them to mess with a lot of the class trees very heavily in preparation for the next expansion and Faded to be able to sort of experiment with them. So let me know what y'all think. And otherwise, make sure you're subbed to the channel and everything like that. And we've been live streaming on YouTube and Twitch simultaneously, so make sure you check those out as well. Thanks for watching, guys.